Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Smart Money Show. My name is Numan Akhtar, and as usual, I'm joined by Ali Suleiman. How's things going?
I'm good. It's been, very perfectly honest, it's been a very hectic morning getting to the offices today that we're going to talk about and the guests that we're speaking to. But we're here, we're set up, so we're very excited to get into this. So I'm just going to jump straight in the interest of time. So today, very, very pleased to be joined by Michael Brown. So a bit of an introduction before we introduce him onto the podcast and we get into what we're going to talk about today. So Michael is a seasoned and award-winning market analyst that's known for his global macro focus and cross-asset expertise. He's currently a senior research strategist at Pepperstone, where he leads the firm's entire research and analysis output during the London and New York trading sessions, supporting around 50,000 active clients across 5 offices and 6 regulatory jurisdictions. At Pepperstone, he provides a mix of technical and fundamental analysis across FX, fixed income, commodities, and equities, offering everything from instant reactions to market-moving events, which you've seen a lot of, to deeper medium-term macro views as well. He's also the host of 2 weekly market analysis shows, each reaching over 15,000 viewers, and contributes regularly to the firm's bespoke client research. He's a trusted voice in both UK and international media. Michael is frequently sought after for his insight into key macro trends, economic data releases, and broader risk events. So we're especially grateful to be recording today's episode at Pepperstone's London office. Huge thanks to Michael for that and the team for making that possible. And in this episode, we'll be diving into his journey through finance, his take on today's macro landscape, and the lessons he's learned building a career at the intersection of markets, media, and strategy. A very, very moderate intro for a very esteemed guest. Michael, very pleased to introduce you onto the podcast. How are you?
Well, very good morning. I'm not entirely sure I'm going to be able to live up to.
We're sure you can. Well, listen, I really just want to jump straight in. I'm very privileged to have attended an event with you before where you kind of talked a little bit about your career, but we're going to really get into it now.
Yeah.
But do you want to kick off?
Yeah, so just a broad question just to kick things off. What was it like growing up, and what's your education journey been like?
Growing up, I mean, we're going back quite a long way now, aren't we? I'm not even sure I can remember it, but in terms of education, I guess mine is probably a little bit more, unconventional, so to speak. No, I'm not saying I didn't go to school or anything like that before, and I'm just worrying. But I left school and came straight into markets. So GCSEs, A-levels, and then straight into foreign exchange, as it was back at my previous job. And then ended up doing an MBA. Well, I finished that about 18 months ago. So, yeah, a little bit kind of not necessarily the normal school, internship, uni, job path. But yeah, here I am. So it's apparently hasn't worked out too badly at the very least.
Well, I think we agree. So let's backtrack a little bit more before we really get into your role and your responsibilities, which we will do later on. Can you recall a moment or experience that you remember sparking your interest within markets, within finance, or anything of that sort?
Not really at the moment. I mean, this is going to sound cliche as hell, so I'm going to apologise for that in advance. But I guess pretty much all of my family have worked in the city and finance in markets in one way or another. So it's one of those where I wasn't sat there at 7 years old reading the FT going, oh, I'd love to be in there one day. But it was kind of one of those things where you're always sort of surrounded by markets, economics, you're sat at a dinner table or at a restaurant or whatever, and that's kind of the topic of conversation. So probably without really even thinking about it, you kind of go, that's almost a natural path to follow. And then certainly when I finished school, my A-levels, I was kind of sat there going, what do I want to do? What's interesting? It was around the time of Brexit. So markets were massively in the news at the time. Obviously, sterling was about to fall off a cliff, as we all know. And just kind of those two things together, you kind of sit there and go, well, this sounds interesting. It seems interesting. I know a little bit about it already. Why not get involved and see what it's like?
Yeah, no, fair enough, and that seems really interesting. But like within this industry, there's sometimes seen like there's a pressure to follow the perfect academic path. Did you ever feel that pressure then, or?
I guess in the early days you do, because I think, and again, this is 10 years ago, so I don't know exactly how it is now, but there is that point where you kind of go, am I sort of missing out on, both education and experience in terms of the whole sort of university side of things? There's also an argument around, you're naturally starting off on a sort of lower base. I don't mean base in terms of salary. I mean base in terms of experience and hierarchy within a business. So you could say, am I kind of playing catch up by having not gone down that route? But then the flip side of that is actually by the time all of my mates had graduated from university, I've got 3 or 4 years experience doing a job, and I've had 2 or 3 promotions in that period. So I would. Maybe there's a bit of luck involved, a bit of chance involved. I don't know, but I would kind of sit there and go, actually, looking back, touch wood, that doesn't seem to have worked out too badly.
Yeah, I think we agree. Do you think someone could do that now? Go out of school straight into? I think it's harder now.
I think it's much harder now, and I think it also depends on the institution as well. So I think if you wanted to go and work for a top tier investment bank, you're going down the spring week, inside week, internship, grad scheme. That's the path. That's the path everyone's got to follow if you want to get your foot in the door at one of those institutions. Early days in your career. I think later on in your career, it's a lot easier to kind of pivot around and do whatever you want because you've got the experience. You've built a network, you've probably got professional qualifications to back that up, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a lot easier to pivot. But I do think that, and again, I'm not overly close to the kind of early stage recruitment aspects of things, but certainly finance is a very, very competitive field. And we were actually talking about this earlier on, off camera, all of the institutions are getting, a few thousand people applying for one job. So almost by default, they need an easy and quick way to just filter those applications. You can't have one bloke at a desk going through that many CVs. It's going to be a thankless task, a never-ending task. So it almost becomes a stage where you go, it's just a filtering mechanism to go, do you have a certain level of education? Have you studied a certain subject? Have you got a certain grade in that certain subject? I'm not convinced it's the right approach, personally, because I think actually, if you studied business rather than economics, doesn't that make you a worse candidate for a job in financial markets? Probably not, because you're not going to use much of your economics degree anyway. It's just a case of they need to get that number down as quickly as they can, and that's just the simplest way to do it. So you are missing out on talent by doing it, frankly.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. It's also because, and people think that this traditional university route is the hardest, but then I think going from like someone who doesn't have like a bachelor's and trying to get that experience, so I think that's something that you've done. Really.
Look, also the other thing I would say is, and this is true whether you've been to university or not, no one really cares about anything other than your latest qualification. So when I was first getting into the industry, you're sat in an interview and you're going, what did you study for A levels, or grades did you get, etc. Nowadays someone might go, Mike, when did you do your MBA, or what was the MBA in, or where did you study, whatever. But no one is ever going to sit me down and if anyone who's going to interview me one day is watching this, do it now. But no one's going to sit down in an interview with someone who's been in the industry for 10, 20 years and go, what did you get in your GCSEs? So it gets to a point where there's a tipping point where experience and knowledge matters more than bits of paper.
Yeah, no, I agree. So what did you get in your GCSEs? No, I'm joking. No, I'm joking. Well, listen, you talk about recruitment. So let's go into your kind of first role in finance. Let's go on to your career journey. So what was your first role in finance, and how did it shape your understanding of the industry? What misconceptions did you
Yeah, so I think my first role in the industry actually played a huge part, because I was effectively a desk junior at a foreign exchange firm. And the job was basically to do stuff no one else really wanted to do, at least for the first kind of 6 months or so. Answering phones, booking deals, paid work, all that kind of thing, which sounds boring as hell. But the thing is, it gives you that sort of fundamental understanding of all of the stuff that goes into a foreign exchange transaction and how markets move and all the rest of it. And even just that environment of sitting on a desk, you're hearing conversations, you're listening to business TV, you're reading business news. So even without really thinking about it, you're kind of picking up that knowledge that at some point in the future, you're then going to sort of fall back and rely on. So I think that, for me, gave me quite a good foundation. And then it just kind of progressed from there. So I ended up managing a book of clients on the desk, which was sort of the next step, and trading that book for a period of time. Probably did that for 2 or 3 years. And then that was when I made the pivot into the research function of my previous firm, to go, actually, I'm going to step away from the day-to-day trading side of things and actually dig a lot more into what is moving markets, why are they moving as they are. And that was kind of that was late 2018, early 2019. So that was like peak Brexit noise and nonsense, which was a little bit of a baptism of fire going, all of a sudden, Mike, we want your view on the pound. And I'm going, bloody hell, there's so much that's moving the market at the moment. Where do we even start?
But yeah, but then now that you've of course done a few years, and especially back then as well, what do people misunderstand the most about a career in markets or research then?
Where can I start with that? What do people misunderstand?
Or common misconceptions from a student perspective?
I think a lot of people probably, and again, I don't want to sit here and blow my own trumpet or anything, but I think a lot of people probably don't realise how much work goes into what you read, for example. So if you've got a report that some analyst somewhere has written, whether it's me or anyone else, it's not a case of they've just sat at a desk and spent half an hour typing it up. There's a lot of research that goes in, not just to that report, but also certainly doing the stuff we're doing, where it's very much a kind of global macro focus. And a lot of our clients, I don't want to get too businessy, but a lot of our clients take a very sort of shorter term view on financial markets. A hell of a lot of what you're doing is basically going, what is actually happening right now? How do I stay on top of what's going on? And that takes a hell of a lot of time. It takes a hell of a lot of effort. And it takes a hell of a lot of commitment, because especially now with Trump around, for example, it's not a 9-to-5 job. You don't rock up at 9 and go, where's the market and how does it look compared to where it was at 5 when I left the desk last night? No, if something happens at 9 o'clock the night before, then you better know it's happened, because you've got a client or a journalist asking you what's happened about 5 minutes after it has. So I think that's probably the misconception, is actually it's not quite as simple, and maybe not quite as fun as it might sometimes look. People will go, oh, well, you're giving a presentation at an event, or you're hosting a client dinner or whatever. And yeah, that's great. I'm not going to lie, they are really nice perks to have, but you've got to work for it.
Yeah, no, I agree, because a lot of people think that the finance industry is like, okay, you've got Ivy, they've got 100 hours, like crazy hours a week, and then everyone else is doing 9 to 5, 40 hours. But that's completely wrong, isn't it?
No, don't get it wrong. You can do if you want to do a 9 to 5 and work in research, go and do a 9 to 5. You're just not going to get very far. And I know that sounds really brutal, but I'm just being completely honest, because, and I think this is common across, actually not just necessarily finance, which is obviously where my experience is, but I would say sort of common across most jobs. You get out what you put in. If you want to do 9 to 5 and work from home 4 days a week, fine. But you're going to be in that 9 to 5, 4 days a week at home job probably forever. Whereas if you go, actually, I'm going to be in at 7 in a finance context, and I'm going to leave at 6, and I'm going to do a couple of hours, after work, and I might log in on a Sunday afternoon to sort of prep myself for the week, and you're present and you're in the office and you're meeting the people you need to meet, you're going to have a much better chance of progressing in your career than someone who just wants a day job.
Yeah, I think I've always said, from a student capacity perspective sort of thing, going to university, if you go to your LSE, it doesn't mean you're going to be automatically better off than someone who goes to a non-Russell Group university. Or always say your environment is what you make of it.
No, 100%. We've now got viewers going, who the hell is this dinosaur that you invited onto your program? But that is genuinely still the mindset. Certainly in finance, a lot of us do have a bit of an old-fashioned mindset, and that is definitely the way that people think and the way that businesses act.
Okay, cool. So in your journey, and we're going to get onto markets in the next session a little bit, but in your career journey so far, continuing career journey very early on, what's been the most challenging point, and how did you overcome it, and what did you learn from it?
It's interesting. We were actually having this discussion earlier. It's hard to pick out one, because, and again, to kind of relate this to trading, there's a phenomenon, recency bias, where you're always going to remember things that have happened recently and think they're bigger and more important than they actually were. So obviously what springs to mind is what happened at the start of April when you got Trump threat tariffs around and markets are dislocated all over the place. Looking back now, and we're only sort of 3 weeks down the line, you kind of go, actually, it wasn't fun, but it wasn't actually that bad, and we're back where we were before that happened anyway. I think probably the most challenging period would be COVID. Not necessarily. I think the issue with COVID was, one, it was very unpredictable. Let's be honest, I don't think anyone involved in markets had ever really gone, what happens if a public health crisis evolves? That's never something you've even thought about. The second was, it was incredibly volatile and liquidity was very thin, and it was just pretty horrible. And then on top of all of that, you're sat there at home, hunched over a laptop, rather than trying to work off a dodgy Wi-Fi connection on a Zoom call that's breaking up all the time with 40 people on it, as opposed to sitting on a trading floor with 4 screens shouting at someone. So it's those 3 things combined of the uncertainty, the unknown, and the really unfamiliar environment that you're suddenly working in. I think most people who were involved around that period would say this was probably the most challenging sort of 3 months or so that we've ever had to deal with. Because the other point I'd make on that is, and you get asked this a lot, and people will always go, in their heads, they'll assume, the most challenging time was it, like when Trump got elected, or, when Biden won the 2020 election, or an election here, or Brexit, all this kind of stuff. Brexit's slightly different, but all the political stuff is actually relatively predictable. Not in terms of the outcome. I mean, if I knew the outcome, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on a beach betting. But in terms of how it will pan out, it's very predictable. It's very controllable. The stuff that's challenging is the stuff you can't control, and that's when you really have to think and put a lot more effort.
Well, just a quick follow-up on that answer. So that's a challenging point in markets. But in your journey, were there any kind of career moves or kind of pivots or decisions that you remember making that felt risky at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think any career move you make has a degree of risk associated with it. So my previous firm, I was there for getting on for 7 years. So when you leave the firm you've been at for 7 years to go and do something completely new in a different part of the industry, you're kind of sat there. And, I mean, touch wood, it's turned out to be the right move. I'm still here. They let me have the load. But at the time, you're kind of going, I think this is the right move, but there is a degree of risk associated with it. And I think it's a question of any job move. What's the risk reward? Does the reward or the potential reward outweigh the risk? If it does, it's probably the right thing to do. Nothing in anyone's career, whether they work in finance, whether they're senior, junior, whatever, is completely risk-free.
Yeah, now moving on to like more markets 101. So talking about how students can like really learn about markets. So then, how would you explain your macro lens to like a student or someone like us?
Bloody hell. So I think the way that I kind of tend to look at markets, and I think because I've been doing this for quite a while now, and it allows me to do things in this way, is you're never really starting from like a completely blank canvas, if that makes sense. So, great example. We're sat here in 2 hours' time. We've got a whole load of labour market data out of the United States. Yeah. Now, I'm going to be sat at my desk and we're going to digest that data, and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to write some research around it, whatever. But I'm going to be looking at that data in the context of the last year's worth of non-farm payrolls numbers, the broad shape of which is just in your memory because you kind of remember it, but also in the context of everything that is coming up. And also that data then just adds to what I'm already thinking about the US economy. So I'm already sat here going, well, we know there's a load of tariffs. There's a load of uncertainty around those tariffs. And we're going to get a jobs report. And if it's a decent jobs report, it probably just means that the inevitable slowdown has been delayed. And if it's a soft jobs report, maybe the slowdown from tariffs is coming earlier than we expect. So every sort of bit of information that we're getting is just basically all I'm asking myself is, does this confirm what I was already thinking? Or does this mean I need to change what I was already thinking? I'm never kind of coming into the office on a Monday morning going, right, need to think about the US today. Let's look at all the key metrics, because you kind of just know them anyway. So I think it's a bit difficult for me to kind of sit here and go, how do you build a macro framework? I think the first thing is you need to just be on top of all of the inputs into that framework. And then if you go, how do you apply that to markets? That's a completely different kettle of fish, because it's absolutely fine to sit here and go, the US economy is facing a lot of headwinds, growth is going to slow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you then go, how do I trade that? Well, you also need to know what markets are doing. Where's sentiment? Where's positioning? How have markets traded in the last 6 weeks? Because we could be sitting here going, the US is going into recession, which probably is. But if the market's already priced that in, there's no point putting a load of bearish bets on, because you're just going to get caught offside. So there's certainly in the job I'm doing now, there's sort of 2 things you need to consider. One is what's going on. And then the second is, how do you actually trade on that?
My next question was gonna ask like, what are some fundamental principles you have and mental models? But I think you've asked that, so I'm gonna ask instead, how do you decide when to trust the data versus when to trust market price action? And is there any like examples of that?
I think you have to trust both, but for different reasons. So, and I'm going to annoy all the conspiracy theorists on the internet now, but there's a lot of people out there who you get a job. Let's take the job summit just because they're coming out late, isn't it? And non-farm payrolls comes out 130,000. They go, oh, well, that's fake. It's made up. Well, I'm sorry. The government cannot fix a pothole and empty a bin. They are not capable enough of pulling off a conspiracy to defraud us of job numbers every month. That's just not a thing. And even if it was, they're still the most accurate numbers we're going to get. So we've just got to trust them and take them at face value. And if you want to pick them apart, go pick them apart, but it's not going to actually give you any benefit whatsoever. So I think you always have to go, the data is the data. Yeah. There may be factors that influence the data, a one-off. So for example, one of the things during COVID that we saw was average hourly earnings in the United States were growing at 8% a year. And you kind of go, well, that can't be right. No, it is right. Yeah. It's an average. What's happened is during COVID, all of the people on lower wages have been laid off. So it skews your average higher. So you trust the data, but you can also interrogate it and explain why there might be a discrepancy in what you're seeing. In terms of market pricing, that's a completely different story. So, for example, right now, the market is pricing in about 100 basis points. So 4 rate cuts from the Fed in the United States this year between now and December. I am very comfortable sitting here saying that probably won't happen. And I think that's way too aggressive in terms of what's likely to be delivered. And the reason why I'm happy to do that, and I'd be happy to also sit here and say, the S&P at 5,600 is probably too lofty for the conditions that we're currently seeing and the outlook that we're looking at, is because markets are trading off sentiment, off human behavior, and that is effectively a discounting mechanism, and that's the way the market works. There's also going to be someone out there sat on another podcast saying the S&P should be trading at 6,000. Yeah. Well, I'm sat here saying we should be trading at 52, and that's why the market works, because there are those grey areas and those vagaries, and it's all about people's opinions and viewpoints, not a question of, is it black and white? It's a number. You can't argue with the number because it's in front of you.
I agree, because but then I think you also have to like look at it a bit more long term as well, because if you think back like the start of this year, that number, the S&P, everyone was thinking it was going to be what, 6,500, but of course now the table's completely flipped. But then, are there any market themes that kind of shape the way you think more longer term then?
Well, I've always tried to take quite a long term view of financial markets. I think, to be completely honest with you, nobody, if you go and say, where is dollar yen going to trade over the next hour? Nobody can give you an answer to that with any certainty. And if they get it right, even if I sat and went dollar yen will trade down to 144.30 by 12 o'clock, if I got it right, that's just pure luck. Yeah. You know, that's not me being some sort of, clairvoyant. That's just pure chance. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get it wrong. So I think actually there's relatively little to be obtained in terms of signal from short-term price moves. And to be completely honest with you, I don't really care whether the dollar has traded 1/3% higher or 1/3% lower over the last day. What I'm really caring about is, where's it traded over the last week? Where's it traded over the last month? And the reason for that is because if you are, like I'm sat there going, I'm taking a global macro view of things, well, if there's a really big change in how the economy operates, that does not get digested in a day. So a really good example of that is at the start of the month, we saw basically a sell America trade. People coming out of the dollar, they're coming out of treasuries, and they're coming out of equities, basically all in one go. Now, we've seen that subside a bit since. The S&P's about where it was, before Liberation Day, sorry. Horrible phrase. It's not my phrase, clearly. Treasuries have rallied, 10 and 30-year yields have fallen quite considerably, and the dollar's also gained back a bit of ground. So now there's all this talk in the financial media of, maybe sell America isn't happening. Well, no, it still is happening, because we're still, the factors that were driving that were the uncertainty, the volatility, and the incoherence with which the Trump administration making policy, coupled with then eroding the credibility of the US by doing things like attacking Jay Powell. And you turn around and you go, actually, okay, fine. The news flow is now positive rather than negative, but it's still volatile, it's still uncertain, it's still incoherent, and Trump's still attacking Jay Powell. He's just not using his name anymore. So it's one of those where you kind of go, actually, this is a longer term shift where people are saying the US is not as safe as it was. Just because we're 2 weeks on and the dollar's rallied 1%, it doesn't mean that everyone's sat there going, oh, the US is a haven again. It's going to take months for that sort of thing to pan out. So I think that's, and again, that's just the way I look at markets. I'm taking that longer term view because that's how the perspective I use. I know a lot of other market participants that will trade in much more of a systematic way. And actually, they will care about the next 10 minutes in dollar yen because they believe, and they probably do, have an edge in that period. Personally, I know that my edge is not there, so I'm not going to get involved with that.
I think we really appreciate the realism of that answer as well. We could speak about markets for a very, very, very long time, but our audience like to hear about how they can get into the field of our guest. And for yourself, that is markets and research. So for students trying to get into macro research markets, what's the best way to start?
Well, I think it's difficult. I'm not going to beat around the bush on that one. As we say, I think finance is a very, very competitive industry ultimately. So that applies to research as well. I think probably one of the best things you can do that would, and I'm sitting here now talking from the point of view of if I want to hire someone, and sadly I'm not at the moment, before I get anyone's hopes up with that. But I think one of the things that would actually set you apart is if you can come with something that demonstrates your knowledge, but also your commitment to what you want to do. So it's not particularly hard for you to be up to speed with what's going on in financial markets. Nowadays, I'm going to sound really old-fashioned, but you can sit here on your phone and go on Bloomberg website and read the top 3 articles, and you know enough to be able to have a discussion with someone in an interview. And that's all you need to do. You should also know roughly where assets are trading. I'm never going to sit there in an interview and go, where's the 10-year yield trading, for example, and expect you to get that right to 4 decimal places. It's never going to happen. But if you tell me it's trading at 7% when it's actually trading near a 4, I'm going to kind of sit here and start scratching my head. So demonstrate that you've got a level of knowledge about what you're trying to tap into ultimately. The second thing in terms of demonstrating the commitment is, again, it's really easy. And I'm quite prevalent on Twitter nowadays, mainly for puns, which people are annoyed with. But it's very easy now to what the youngsters would call create content. Whether that be, now again, I'm old-fashioned, so I like to write things. So I write a daily note. I'll post thoughts throughout the day on Twitter, on LinkedIn, whatever it may be. You guys are obviously doing your podcasts like this. You may want to start a YouTube or a TikTok or whatever it may be, but just have something that demonstrates that you are committed to what you do. Even if you get no reviews or a handful of views or whatever it may be, again, it's a talking point where you can sit there and say to someone, actually, not only do I know what I'm talking about, but actually I also write every Saturday morning. I post a 500 word market wrap on LinkedIn. And someone will go, oh, actually, you're thinking outside the box. You're doing something that sets yourself apart a little bit because you're not already doing the job, but it's clear that, you're committed to what you want to do because you're already sort of trying to build a name for yourself and build that reputation. And I think that will really help because not only does it provide evidence the person who's trying to hire you or considering hiring you say, actually, they know what they're doing and they're committed to doing it. But it also gets you into the mindset of, if I get this job, this is the sort of thing I'm going to have to be doing.
Yeah, so we are at Pepperstone's offices. You've got a beautiful P behind you as well. So talking about your current role then, and what do you do, and what does a typical day look like for you?
What does a typical day look like for me? To be honest, and again, this is a horrible cliche, but no 2 days are the same. But as a general kind of steer as to what I'm doing, literally the first thing I'm doing when I wake up is going, what has Donald Trump said overnight? And then I'm trying to work out where markets are. So, I'll go to bed at 10-ish, whatever, and my alarm's 4:30. So I'll be waking up and going, where are markets? Where are markets trading? Have I missed anything overnight? Is there anything really important I need to catch up on? That's kind of the first things I'm doing, when I wake up. then every single day I will write some commentary. Sometimes it'll be very long, sometimes it'll be very short, depending on what's going on. And that will go out to clients, journalists, anyone who wants it, basically, just to sort of, well, one, to put across Pepperstone's view on markets and how they're trading and how they're developing. But also one of the things I find is actually it really helps me to know what's going on. Because literally the first task I'm doing in the day is to put my views into the written word. It helps to crystallize that in my head and make me go, okay, I now feel like I'm set up for the day. Then I'll get myself in the office pretty much in every day, maybe the odd Friday at home. And then it really does vary depending on what's going on during the day. So like the morning will generally be taken up with various calls and meetings, a lot of kind of morning briefings, standard stuff you get on any sales floor, running through where markets are, what's coming up today, what are the big risks to look out for, all this kind of stuff. There might be a few TV appearances in there, whether they be down the line in terms of Zoom, sorry, a bit of TV jargon for you there, or going down into studios, whatever it may be. There's other written stuff that will need to be done during the day. So, for example, next week we've got, I don't know where this is going out, but we've got meetings for the Fed and the Bank of England. So, obviously, you need to be formulating a view on what they're likely to do, writing previews for that, all this kind of thing. Various client calls during the day, and that takes up the bulk of your time. Because when you're not doing any of that, you're sat at the desk going, what's going on? How are markets moving? We've just had an inflation number out. How has that changed the landscape for the ECB, if it's kind of Europe, wherever it may be? So that kind of takes up the bulk of the day, to be completely honest with you. And then you're off home, and I will, because I'm giving an un-HR answer here, I will log in again. And actually I will use that kind of 7:30 to 9-ish period. So that's the US closes, 9 o'clock, which obviously now matters. So my role is cross asset, so that matters when the US is open in terms of equities. So I'll use that to then start thinking of the next day. So, what have we got coming up tomorrow? What do I need to be aware of? What should I be thinking of that could drive markets the next day? And then if there's earnings after the close, like last night we had Amazon and Apple reporting, so you're working out what they're doing. And I think that's even more important now because they're exposed massively to the tariff thing. So obviously you're really interested in how those corporates are dealing with all the trade uncertainty. So quite a lot going on. That's a typical day, an atypical day. You might have various client events, whether it be a seminar or some sort of hospitality we're doing somewhere, dinners, whatever it may be. A lot of staring at Bloomberg, basically, in terms of a typical day of a research.
Well, it does sound varied, though. There's a lot of different bits, but it sounds like it's all tailored around or centered around research.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do you tailor that commentary, that research towards different audiences? Like you said, a lot of people, anyone who wants it will get it. But how do you tailor it to like retail versus institutional clients or whatever? You not?
No, I don't. The honest answer to what I don't is because I'm a bit lazy. I probably could. But on a slightly more serious note, there's only so much tailoring that you can do. So, for example, whether I'm talking to a major institution or a more modest private client or a journalist, if I'm giving a view on, let's say all three of those people say, Mike, what do you think of the dollar? Where's the dollar going to go next? I'm still going to give the same view. And the view is still going to be backed up by the same reasons. The only thing that will change is the potential follow-up questions that might stem from what I'm talking about. And what I mean by that is if you're talking to someone who's perhaps less experienced, they may have more questions around, the mechanics of why an interest rate decision moves the market in a certain way, whereas someone who is a lot more experienced would have a question around actually, why do you think that the Fed are going to do what you say they're going to do? I think for me, I don't see that much value in writing differently for different audiences because ultimately you're talking about the same events and the same themes and the same view. You're kind of limited as to what you can really do with that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. But do you ever face research blocks or burnout? And then how do you push through them?
Yeah, all the time. All the time. Research blocks are something that you're never going to be able to properly get rid of. And it's really weird. At the moment, I'm going to jinx myself now and go to sit at my desk and not have a clue what's right on it. But generally, research is weird because I've had times where, certainly now the market's busy, there's enough kind of going on to make your brain sort of pop. But there are times where things are more subdued. And I'd be sat at my desk going, not really sure, what's going on with this, or not really sure how I can frame this argument, whatever it may be. And then, an hour later, I'll be stood there in a queue getting a coffee and suddenly go, I was about to swear that. Oh, wow, now I know how to phrase this. And I'm stood there in the coffee shop sending an email to myself, writing half a research note. So I think it's just a natural thing. Maybe it's a change of scenery, maybe it's a walk to clear your head, whatever it might be. I think it's just one of those where even subconsciously you've kind of probably mulling something over, and then all of a sudden it's at the front of your head and away you go. In terms of burnout, I'm like genuinely the last person who is in any position to answer that question whatsoever. I've just sat here and told you I work from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. So yeah, just maybe drink a lot of coffee.
So what's one underrated skill that you don't talk about enough that's helped you throughout your career, would you say?
That's a very good question. I would say, I don't really know how to phrase this in one word, but it's the softer skills that matter. It's the communication, it's the relationships you can build with people. It's even what people will consider small things like the laughs and the jokes and the banter that you have on the floor during the day when things are quiet. That is massively underrated. Yes, you need to work hard, and yes, you need to put a lot of effort in. You can't just be, a class clown or a joker for the sake of being a joker. Yes. But you also need to have personality. And you need to, particularly in terms of research and commentary, you need to actually let that personality come out a little bit more as well. Because, and I'm not saying I'm writing the best research ever, it isn't. But although there is an award over there that says it is. But what I would say is there are 100 people on the street trying to tell you what happened in markets yesterday. You need to not necessarily do something different, but you need to do something in an engaging manner and inject a degree of color and personality into that. And also just in terms of your personality in the workplace more broadly, don't be a robot. Just have something about you that, helps you form those relationships with other people.
So we're on the last section of this episode. You've been smashed this interview. You're going to get a nice sign-on bonus from us. Don't worry. But
I don't even get a bonus.
You can always contact us on our email for that. But so this question is a bit more vague. But looking back on your career journey, what are you the most proud of then?
Most proud of NBA, easily the NBA, because I'm not going to say my job's easy, but your job is familiar. You get very used to markets, macro, how you write, who you talk to, etc., etc., etc. My MBA was something totally different. Never been to university. So one of the things that I really found challenging, and everyone I've told this how, was writing. So I'd write for a job. That is my bread and butter. I sit there and I write. Get to my MBA and I'm like, writer's block. Terrible. Because it's a different tone. It's all the academic referencing. It's a completely different subject. I'm sat there writing an essay or a report on, psychology at organizations. I'm like, I remember vividly, I think it was a 2,000-word report or something. I'm like, that was a 2,000-word report on, the Fed. It would take me about half a day, maybe less. This has taken me half a month and I'm still only halfway through it. So I think that was challenging for me. It's a big step out of the comfort zone, completely new environment. You're in a room with 60 odd other people ranging in experience, in sector. You're surrounded by finance people who are all relatively similar. You're suddenly sat in a room with, people from the NHS, people from government, armed forces, all this kind of thing. And you're trying to network with them and learn a whole lot of new stuff about how business and organizations work. Oh, and do a full-time job. Though it was a really fun and rewarding 2 years or so, but it was also an incredibly challenging 2 years or so as well. Yeah. But I would say worth it.
Yeah, well, 100%. And it must have been even more tough because he hadn't had the experience of doing an undergraduate degree.
Yeah.
I wish we could talk more about that, but in the interest of time, so including that question, these are the last 3 questions. But if you probably heard this before, but if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Knuckle down, work hard, give it 100% every day. We have a personality, let that come through. I think it would be basically very much in line with what we've been talking about here, to be completely honest with you. I think that would probably be it.
Last but not the least, what's the biggest takeaway people should take from your story then?
Don't be like Mike. Take away from this. Blimey. You know what? I'm going to give a really politician's answer now. I'm going to say, take away whatever you want to take away from this. If you listen to this and go, actually, this bloke's a bit of an idiot, then fine. I don't mind that. If you listen to this and go, actually, maybe I'll do an MBA in the middle of my career, great, do an MBA. If you listen to this and go, I'm going to now start, creating some content on markets because it's going to get me ahead in interviews, great, take that away. Yeah. I'm not going to sit here and say to people, the one thing you really need to understand is X. You can take away whatever you want to take away. I think, that's why we sat here and had a chat for, an hour or so. People could, if they've got this far, thank you very much for listening. But take away whatever you think is valuable from all of this. And if you don't think there's any value in it, then, keep that to yourself, I guess.
Yeah, what a way to end the episode. And we could talk for literally such a long time. We had a few questions that we glossed over because your answers have been very, very holistic as well. But for our listeners and viewers, we really hope you enjoyed that episode as much as we did. If you're watching us on YouTube, which we hope you are, and you haven't subscribed for some reason, well, surely after that episode, we deserve to subscribe. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, drop a comment if there's someone we should be speaking to that we haven't spoken to yet, or something we should be talking about that we haven't spoken about yet. And if the same thing on audio platforms as well, you can drop us a follow, give us a rating, and drop a comment on there, and show us some love on our social media platforms as well. And be sure to sign up to our newsletter and articles in the link in the description below. But thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week for another episode of the Smart Money Show.